Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and as you can see, I have with me a very distinguished diplomat, Ambassador Ausaf Sayeed Sahab, who has served India for more than 35 years. He was a secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was also ambassador to Saudi Arabia and many other countries, including Yemen. And he has also served in the private sector. He is a prominent expert on basically what we call the Middle East and what in India is called as West Asia. So today we are going to talk about his views on the Gaza peace process, what India's role could have been and should be in the Middle East. Is there a changing geopolitics in the Middle East with the rise of Pakistani significance and India's place in the Middle East? And we will also talk a little bit about what's going on with Saudi Arabia, given his long experience with Saudi Arabia. Ambassador Saeed Saab, welcome to Khanversations.
Thank you very much, Asaf, and thanks for inviting me. I watch your show. It is a very interesting show, and you do get a lot of good people who talk in depth about the issues which are of contemporary relevance. So my pleasure to be on your show.
So thank you very much, sir, and also for those of you who already know me, that I'm a little biased towards Hyderabad. So we are both Hyderabadis. I just wanted to let people know that. So let's talk about it. What is your impression of the Gaza peace process? For me, there were 2 or 3 positives. One was that, okay, the killing has stopped at the scale that it was going on. The second thing is that finally the Rafah, the thing has opened up and some aid is coming into Gaza. And the third thing is that there's an acknowledgement that Israel will withdraw. It means the whole discussion and the fear that there would be ethnic cleansing and occupation of Gaza permanently. Those 3 things, I think, have receded from prominence. Other than that, I see this as a perpetual plan to colonize Gaza and keep Gaza under Israeli sovereignty. So how do you see the peace process?
You see, I mean, first and foremost, we start with Sharm Sheikh, Gaza summit. Now, that particular summit, which was co-chaired by US and Egypt, appeared to me to be heavily choreographed. It was kind of an innovation, I would say, a diplomatic innovation, maybe to create an impact, but it all appeared to be like a one-man show with little or no inputs from the other participants. As you would have seen, there was hardly any time for any discussion. In fact, President Trump had announced in his speech, during his speech in Knesset, that the war is already over, even before the initials were put on the accord. So there were no substantive discussions before the accord was signed by the quartet. Very interestingly, Israel and Hamas, the principal adversaries, were not involved in these negotiations. So there is no signature anywhere of Israel or Hamas. So they may not take ownership of this. But of course, there is a new element is that the 20 countries have been there, endorsed it. So it is there. So I think the accord, as you also mentioned, one, it prioritized, the de-escalation, stopping the killings. So that was the most important, because that had really sensitized the whole world. So they wanted that thing to be stopped first. Exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners, and resumption of humanitarian aid, particularly from Rafah border and all that. But if you see, there is no mention at all of the final status issues. These are all very vague. Nobody knows. There is no talk about Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories. There is no talk about the road to Palestinian statehood. So this puts everything into a kind of a serious doubt about the sustainability of the whole process. Now, when President Trump put up his 20-point, the plan. So what it was is basically it was meant on 3 pillars: security, governance, and restructuring. Now, and they said that there will be a technocratic Palestinian, committee which will be overseeing this, and we don't know what is technocratic means, and it will be chaired by a board of peace, which will be headed by Trump himself. And of
Yeah.
course, the few other thing, and we haven't heard much about other members other than Tony Blair. So there would be some kind of an international oversight and international security force and all that. So then they said it is all then conditional to Palestinian authorities reforms for any other thing to take place. So but the contours of this, even this is being worked out. So really nobody knows what this plan would be. But at the same time, there were other models also thrown up. For example, we have Egyptian model related to this, but an Egyptian version of that. Then there is a UAE version. Now, under the Egyptian version, they say that the oversight does not have to be international. It could be national only. The UAE version, with a slight tweak, they said, okay, the if there is an international oversight, it has to be a very, very temporary missions, and the transition to the PA authority has to be very small. So, but in all these models, there is only one thing which comes out, that Palestine, Gaza, and West Bank put together, Gaza in particular, but also West Bank, would remain as an externally governed territory, where Palestinians are being, receiving administration or being governed or ruled, whatever you would like to say, without any real power going to them. So the fundamental issues, borders between Palestine and Israel, sovereignty issue of Palestine, refugees, return of refugees, Palestinians who have gone to different countries over the years and they have a right to come back, all these have not been discussed at all. So this is a kind of a anomaly which is there in this the entire Gaza plan.
One of the troubling things is that Jared Kushner was asked this exact question, and what he said was, to me, very troubling. He said the reason why we were successful with phase one and getting this deal is because we did not go into the details. And once we go into the details, that is where the disagreements arise. And so the first step itself does not happen, because the people point out to problems in the second and the third step. But to me, it appears that Donald Trump is looking at it as a very short-term solution, like can I get a ceasefire now? Can I get a Nobel Prize next year? It seems to be that kind of a thing, that can I claim that I'm done? Plus, I think there is also this very subtle feeling that perhaps he wants to get rid of the Israeli lobby's pressure on himself to do things. So if he can end the war, then he can focus back on what he wants to do inside the US. But one of the things that I did notice is that there is zero discussion of self-governance or no word of election in Gaza or West Bank. So there's clearly no discussion, as you so rightly pointed out, about whether the Palestinians will govern themselves. And I think Netanyahu deliberately added that caveat about reforming of PLO, because he can always say they have not reformed enough, so they cannot, Palestinian Authority has not reformed enough to be in charge. So
Right.
what we are going to see is some kind of a prolonged, sustained international stuff. And this is where I wanted to know that would India have could India have played a role in this post ceasefire Middle East, given the fact that India probably enjoys more respect in the Arab world, as well as Israel, than any other country? I mean, I can't think of any other country which is respected by both. Arabs like America because they need stuff from America, but they don't. There's a lot of hatred towards the US, unlike India.
Traditionally, India, doesn't play, a direct mediatory role in political conflicts in general, So we haven't done, these kind of things. So as you know, we have a policy where we are friendly both to the Palestinians as well as the Israelis. Now, if you say that India has already consistently supported for a Palestinian cause, including backing its independence as a sovereign state, in a two-state solution, we have backed it. Both Palestine and Israel, coexisting, simultaneously side by side, but as a negotiated settlement between them. Now, this position has also been very recently restated and reaffirmed in various bilateral and multilateral forums. You're talking about earlier this year, including in UN and non-aligned movement and all that. Now, if we go back a little back in time, you would know that India was perhaps the first non-Arab state,
Correct.
to recognize the PLO in 1974. And we opened and we also were the first country, one of the first countries outside of the region to kind of recognize the Palestinian state. That was in 1988, and 1996 we had opened our office in representative office in Gaza and then to Ramallah. So there is a historic there is a history of support. In fact, going even back, Mahatma Gandhi himself had supported this idea of a Palestinian state. That time, of course, things were not as clear as they are now. So, but then this, I mean, I'm talking about the sentiment. So then India was always there to provide developmental assistance programs to Palestine all these years. And I think, if I'm not wrong, so far about 150 million odd assistance was given. This was in addition to also providing time and again budgetary support to the Palestinian Authority. Then things like doing COVID, providing medicines, medical supplies, artificial limb programs. Then we also offered a line of credit to the tune of 50 million and so on and so forth. In fact, I was in Palestine, just before that October 7 attack. It was in July 2023. I was there, extensive visit, met all the top leadership and also people, and inaugurated some of these developmental projects, which was very badly needed by them. But at the same time, the impression of the public was that the government is ineffective, maybe corruption has set in. So there was disillusionment of people vis-a-vis the own government. And if we know now that President Mahmoud Abbas
This was
was
in,
supposed
in
to be
this was in
furloughed.
Gaza or West Bank, sir?
No, no, I couldn't go to Gaza. It was West Bank
West
because
Bank. Yeah.
Gaza again, there was no permission allowed to our mission to kind of go there. Because at that time maybe some volatile situation was there. So, but even when in Ramallah, you could see this. I'm talking about Ramallah in particular, not in Gaza.
Yeah, sure.
So when we are talking about these reforms to be brought in, there are all these issues which have to be come up. So for 20 years there has been no change in governance and the same thing. So so people are also desperate for change there in
Inside the Palestine. Yeah.
yeah, Palestine. That's also complicates the matter. Because if you don't have a good model, then from outside a model cannot be imposed on you. There could always be a suggestion, but beyond that there cannot be anything else. So this is again a very tricky process.
But sir, if you've noticed in the past few years, especially under the current dispensation in New Delhi, India has become more and more aligned towards Palestine. The degree of support for Palestine that we see in Europe and other parts of the world, we don't see in India on the streets. The Indian media seems to be completely in favor of Israel, including the fact that India has been selling weapons, and the voting pattern of India at the UN. There seems to be an effort to try and on one hand this and on one hand that. So in that sense, do you think that with the great attention that suddenly Donald Trump is giving to Pakistan, and Shehbaz Sharif was one of the few people who got to speak at the Sharm el Sheikh event, if you remember, and Pakistan is now probably going to be one of the few countries that might provide forces for the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. So do you think that in some ways, the increased presence of Pakistan during this in this particular issue area is diminishing India's importance in the Middle East? That in the last 3-4 years, you could have seen that India had become so important, especially with the Gulf, with I2U2, and the partnership with UAE and Saudi Arabia. Do you think we are losing some ground there in the past few months?
Yeah, good question. Before I come to the Pakistan angle, I would just like to give you the thing that the India's diplomatic momentum with the Arab countries have actually remained intact, despite what appears that okay, Pakistan is gaining some prominence and other things. Because if you go back, our relationship goes back to historical times, maybe 1,000 years, 1,000 years plus, and in various things, historical contacts, cultural contacts, trading, pilgrimage. So the relationship is very strong. And now in the contemporary times, it is actually revolving around energy cooperation, security and defense cooperation, maritime cooperation, investments. So it's a whole spectrum of things. Then don't forget that India has a strategic partnership with key countries in West Asia and almost all countries in the
Sure.
Gulf, prominently UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt most recently, Kuwait and Qatar. And then with Oman, we already had a strategic partnership, which has been actually upgraded now to provide access to Duqm port, which would kind of bolster our strategic footprint in the Arabian Sea. Um, we have seen also the number of visits which the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji had taken on, in different parts of GCC. So if I just tell you about the last 2 years, for example, 2024, he visited three countries: UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. And Kuwait, mind you, it was after 40 years any Indian Prime Minister went there. And
Yeah.
his first visit also to UAE was also more or less like that. And of course, in the current year, he was there in Saudi Arabia, earlier this year as part of the strategic partnership, arrangement. You also mentioned that India has been engaging, with I2U2, IMAC, and all these things. So there are whole platforms which are there under which India is engaging with the Gulf countries. Also, I think under the multilateral platform, under multilateral engagements like G20, which we hosted last in 2023, during which only this IMEC was actually put
Yeah.
forward as a thing. Then expansion of BRICS, SCO, Quad framework. So you name it, India has been championing the cause of global South. So that is where the Gulf countries also understand that this is a kind of a nuanced relationship, balanced relationship which India has. It's a kind of a de-hyphenated policy. While India is building its relationship with Israel, it is not at the cost of Palestine, nor is it at the cost of any Arab country. Now, coming to your question about is why is Pakistan gaining visibility, and is this at the cost of India? First and foremost, I don't think it is kind of right to compare Pakistan with India, because in any aspect, if you see economy, if you see India is the third largest economy globally, then nearly 7% economic growth, and
Yeah.
so there is no comparison there. Even in terms of scientific development, security cooperations, defense development, all these things, I think it's a completely different thing. So I would not like to compare. But having said that, it appears that Pakistan has gained, enhanced Middle Eastern visibility through, strategic alignment with Saudi-led regional dynamics. So, not very long ago, I remember I was ambassador in Saudi Arabia. Pakistan, in fact, had supported a conference which took place in Malaysia,
Yeah.
where they were trying to kind of set up another model of Islamic governance, more or less saying that Saudi Arabia considered itself takes pride in considering itself as the custodian of the two holy mosques. So that kind of a thing was there. So that at that time the relationship was hard. But then very recently, of course, also following Iran's missile attack on Pakistan in early 2024, Pakistan was no longer bound by this balancing act between the Arabs and the Iranians, and they thought that they would move into the Saudi-led diplomacy in the Middle East process. So in that process, it has also potentially improved its relations with Washington. And more recently, of course, the Saudi-Pakistan Strategic Mutual Defense Agreement, which was signed, it also gave Pakistan new access to Gulf security conversations. So that has, brought prominence to Pakistan. But having said that, I'm not too sure whether Pakistan will put boots on the ground, because if you recollect, when there was a talk about boots on the Saudi-Yemeni border, there seemed to have been some resistance from the Houthis and others. So I think it's a very difficult question. But my last punchline for this thing is that the Pakistan's so-called newfound status, as a maybe as a security guarantor for Saudi Arabia or other Arab countries, is not at all at the expense of India. India continues to maintain robust relations with all the Gulf partners, and in multiple domains. And I don't see this change, in the times to come.
You, you said something very interesting, and it is a very common statement that we often hear from the Ministry of External Affairs and even Dr. Jaishankar, where you said that we have this dehyphenated relationship. We can maintain good relations with Israel as well as Palestine, which I find a bit difficult to understand. How can you have good relations with Palestine if you are selling bombs to Israel, which is then dropping those bombs on Palestine? I can't understand how that would be considered the hyphenated, and that are growing relations, like some of the votes that India has cast at the UN Security Council, at the UN, basically with Israel and Washington, often against all the votes that are being cast, say, by the global South. So in that context, this idea that, oh, we are going to help the thieves run away, and we'll also help the cops to catch the thief. How does this work, especially in a conflictual situation? I can understand if there is, like, you can be friendly with Argentina and you can be friendly with Ireland and they are not in conflict. But if Ireland and Argentina are at war with each other, then you remain neutral, but you can't claim that I have good relations with both while you sell bombs to one side.
No, I think taking maybe a simplistic view of that. It's not necessarily about the bombs and other things. It's about each country nowadays. With changing times, they are having their own national interest, strategic priorities, and strategic autonomies which they are themselves exercising. Now, when we talk about Israel and Arabs, you know that one of the earliest agreements with Israel were Egypt, the Camp David Agreement 1979. Then we have the Jordan 1994. For a long time, India had no diplomatic relations with Israel. It is only after some of these countries started dealing with Israel directly, and also sometimes through their commercial offices and other thing, then India started establishing relationship, which we established in 1992. Now, you see, even in the contemporary context, you see the Abraham Accords. You see, we had all these Arab countries, 4 Arab countries, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and later joined Sudan. They thought it wise to have, diplomatic relationship with Israel, and they never felt there is a conflict. So, I mean, this argument can also be put up there. So, if those countries are not shying from establishing a diplomatic relationship with Israel, then I think to put conditions on India seems to be a little unreasonable. Because we haven't forgotten the Palestinian cause, as I just mentioned to you, but at the same time, there are other areas in which India is cooperating. See, like I2U2, US, UAE, Israel and India. So I think maybe since the President Trump is thinking about realigning the entire Middle East, maybe down the line these kinds of boundaries may not necessarily remain.
I want to move on, but I do want to make a point that I find it that the Prime Minister of India has, gained a lot of popularity by telling Putin that this is not an era of war. And I've been waiting for more than 2 years for him to say this to Netanyahu, because if this is not an era of war for Russia, this should also not be an era of war for Netanyahu, who's attacked 7 countries. But I want to talk a little bit about this Abrahamic Accords. If you look at the Sharm el-Sheikh deal and all the negotiations that are going on, it is the countries which are outside the Abrahamic Accords who seem to have had a greater impact, especially Turkey and Qatar. And Egypt, technically it is outside Abrahamic Accords, but this is the father of Abrahamic Accords, because they signed the first deal in 1979 with Anwar Sadat's time. So do you think that the fact that the Abrahamic Accords countries have had zero impact on Israeli policies towards Gaza in the past 2 years will make these countries rethink the value of Abrahamic Accords? Because when you look at Sharm el-Sheikh, you must have heard about this, that it was at the insistence of Erdogan that Donald Trump, who had already invited Netanyahu, had to disinvite Netanyahu, otherwise who was going to come to Sharm el Sheikh, and Erdogan said that he would not come. So my reading of that is that these countries, especially Turkey and others, they're not making a deal with Israel. They're making a deal with the United States. And they are hoping that the United States will keep Israel in check. So it's not about, so I think Abrahamic Accords are also not about Israel at all. It's about these Arab countries making deals with the US and sucking up to the US and hoping that the US will protect them. Like, for example, Morocco was able to retain the sovereignty on the west, those part of the territories that it had occupied. So, yeah, so it's not about Israel. It's about basically making Washington happy. And and clearly, in the last 2 years, it has shown that Abrahamic Accords gives you zero influence over Israel. How do you see that, sir?
No, actually, the four countries which have signed the Abraham Accords, I think they were not necessarily linked to the Palestine issue when they signed it. Basically, they were own bilateral interests which were there, which they felt that by going along again at the instance of United States, maybe with some countries it may have given them some incentive to to join the Abraham Accords. But whatever the case may be, their their primary reason for joining the Abraham Accords were not necessarily linked to the Palestinian issue. In fact, the whole exercise which we are seeing now, also this Gaza peace plan and other things, is also to create a scenario where Palestinian question does not become an obstacle for future normalization of relations between Israel and other countries, maybe Saudi Arabia and others. So that was there. Now, Sudan, there are also factional fights and other things. So you can't, this thing. Morocco has not this area, this particular thing. We haven't seen Morocco play a traditional mediatory role, even before the Abraham Accord. So who we have seen is that we have seen Qatar play a mediatory role, in most of these conflicts which are there, whether it was mediating on behalf of Taliban or Hamas or whatever. Then more recently, you have also talked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has also, been playing a very important role, I must say, for both for the Palestinian cause as well as the path to statehood. Because I think in the beginning you made a comment that it seemed that Saudi Arabia is distancing itself, or is there any problem or anything like that. See, I think, to me, Saudi Arabia's restraint on Gaza reconstruction was primarily strategic calculation, rather than disengagement. You see, there is no structure, first of all, has been put in place. We were talking about it. It's a very vague structure which is there. Even the security setup of international forces is vague. So under this, it doesn't want to also, come under pressure where there is a presumed normalization, by coercive method or whatever you say, by inducement. So it was remaining silent to that extent. But of course, there was a representation. His Highness Faisal bin Farhan was there in that thing. So what Saudis are demanding is a sustainable governance arrangements and security guarantees and a clear path leading to Palestine. Now, I'll give you some instances, maybe, then that would put it in perspective. Now, very recently, in last 3-4 years, Saudis have been emphasizing that they made the statehood as the price for normalization of relations with Israel. They said no normalization or Gaza reconstruction without an irreversible path to a sovereign Palestinian state. That's a very strong statement, So that actually takes us also to the Arab peace plan, which was put forward then by, the then Crown Prince Abdullah, Then also very recently, again, in I think September this year, Saudi Arabia co-chaired a high-level UN conference, co-chaired with France. This was again, so that was again a very big move, because that also led to this movement of newer recognitions which are coming to the Palestinian state, because more and more countries are coming forward to. Then it has also used a lot of multilateral forums, Arab Islamic summits, OIC summits, and all that, and trying to come up with a language that uh, if there is a final settlement, it should be as per the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as the capital. They also named an ambassador, although of course he doesn't sit in West Bank, but operates from Jordan. So there are so many of these things which have come up. Then not only this political support, but you see there has also been financial support. One may undermine this thing. One is that they have been supporting UNRWA, which was actually made illegal by Israel, almost to the extent of 40 million. Then there are various relief programs, and in fact, there was a very interesting thing. They carried out a public donation drive for the Palestinians, which was called Sahem, in 2023 November, and that drive raised within 2 or 3 weeks almost 160 million, dollars. So so these things are there, and at the end of the day, what Saudis are wanting is a kind of a regional reconstruction concepts I mentioned to you about Egypt and UAE and other things, and they have set apart a kind of a fund which is about US dollars 20 billion or so, which is a collective pledge. There is no individual pledge from the kingdom as such. So I think not attending a conference should not be given too much credence, of any leader. The fact that the country was represented is good enough, because see, this is a very complex subject and complex issue. So there are layers within layers. So we have to understand, which layers are operating. So everyone will do their own calculations, of how much they go forward. So I think this time Saudi Arabia is putting other countries forward and working in a regional framework. You know.
You know, I'm trying to understand a bit. I mean, you're right that on the issue of statehood, MBS has been very, very clear that unless there is a pathway, in fact, the pathway is a concession that MBS has made to Biden's insistence. There was a lot of pressure from Biden that MBS join the Abrahamic Accords without any pathway or anything. Initially, the position was that first we need to create the Palestinian state, then we will normalize. And now it's saying, okay, let's have a pathway to statehood. And so he's been very clear on that consistently, no doubt about it. But still, I do want to get a little bit of an insight on what is going on with Saudi Arabia. So, for example, for at least a year and a half, it was not very clear whether the Saudis had accepted the invitation to join BRICS or not. Like I remember talking about BRICS last year to my class, and we were doing a simulation on BRICS, and we couldn't figure out whether Saudi Arabia was a member or not a member until recently. It has become clear that it's still in the observer state. It has been invited, it hasn't joined. But if you notice, MBS was invited to the G7 summit in Canada. He did not show up. He did not show up for the UN General Assembly meeting, and especially given the fact that Trump was meeting with the Muslim and Arab countries to finalize the so-called Gaza peace plan. He was not there in that meeting. There has been long overdue discussion that he was going to visit India. He was not there either. So it does appear that he has reduced his international participation. Is he afraid to travel abroad? Like, what is going on? I'm not able to understand why he would miss these opportunities.
I don't think so. You see, he traveled to India, to participate in the G20.
Yeah, but after that, since then, he has not participated.
If I'm not wrong, I have not followed of all his travels, but if I'm not wrong, he did travel. So I don't think there is any travel restriction or any kind of apprehension relating to his travels and all that. But he is fairly active. You see him receiving international guests, hosting all these summits. All those things are there. So he's a very dynamic leader who wants to make a change, make a difference within the kingdom, and also I think to ensure that the region remains stable. Because first and foremost, for Saudi Arabia, it is important that the region remains stable. Is no disruption for oil supplies. Currently they are looking at the Asian countries, China, India, Japan, and South Korea as their main customers. So any disruption here will disrupt the oil supplies, and then yeah, their entire budgeting is done on the premise that the dollar value would go above $90 per barrel. Now, if for some reason some conditions happen where the value of the oil goes down, this again is a problem for them. So so there are these challenges, economic challenges, but I don't think those challenges preclude him to not take any active role in regional politics, which he has been doing. You see, one very successful recent outcome, I mean, recent means in a few years, of course, is a rapprochement between Saudi
Iran.
Arabia and Iran, which is a good thing for the region, because there was always this thing,
Yeah.
Shia Sunni angle was brought in and other things are there. That was also the time when they actually tested, the security umbrella provided, the Western security umbrella provided by the US. And just before that, also the Houthi attacks on Saudi Aramco facilities in Dammam, where I think apparently the US said that it is your war, you have to kind of take care of yourself. So that is where they started kind of building their relationship with other countries, looking at alternatives, developing those economic models, with countries like China, India, Russia, and others. So I think one shouldn't. My advice would be not to jump to
Reach.
that that there is something
Yeah.
problematic there. Yeah.
This is my last question, sir, and this is a bit of a this is my bouncer question for you.
Yes.
There is this perception that since in the past year and a half, especially after Operation Sindoor, India's international stature looks a little bit more diminished than it was, say, in 2023. I think was India's peak year. The G20 was at home. India could have made a big deal out of the SCO summit, but it chose not to. Not only that, Prime Minister Modi was invited to Washington and to address the Congress. But it appears that in the past few months, India's relevance has slightly diminished diplomatically. Do you see it that way? Especially after Operation Sindoor, and often the way Donald Trump has been treating India, not as an important strategic partner, but actually I mean, he's literally trolling and bullying India. So do you see that there is a diminishment, that India's stature globally has been a bit diminished by that, or not?
I don't think India's stature has diminished in any manner, and that too nothing related to Operation Sindoor. I mean, Operation Sindoor is a bilateral matter, so it doesn't really affect India's relations with others or the other countries' relations with India. Now, as far as our relations with the US are concerned, there are issues of tariffs which we are bilaterally discussing with the US teams, and I'm quite hopeful that these things will be sorted out, because at the end of the day, India and US have been strategic partners, looking to work in multilateral forums, quadrilateral forums. We have the Quad with the US, I2U2, many other things which are there. So I think this is a passing phase with US relating to tariffs, because it is actually President Trump's idea to kind of use tariffs as an instrument of foreign policy, and which he has been doing for countries across the board, not necessarily India.
Yeah.
Now, the other things are complicated. Why on India? Why more tariffs on India? Linking to buying of oil from Russia and other thing. This there has been a lot of debate on this. People have spoken about it, because I think the parameters which Western countries are putting for themselves, those parameters are not actually kept for the developing countries. The same yardstick is not there. While European countries are free to buy gas, free to buy oil, but when the developed countries are buying, there is always this question. And we should understand the domestic compulsions also. The point is that if even $1 less price in the import of oil per barrel would have a salutary effect on our economies. So obviously, any country would like to kind of look at the opportunity to to have those kinds of savings so that the money goes into economy for the welfare of the people. This has been there. For example, we used to have also importing oil from Iran. This was actually again at very favorable terms, and with other countries like Venezuela. So on the one hand, all sanctions are imposed on these countries which could potentially supply, and whichever country is there, so this is a little tricky question. But coming back to this, I think there is a bipartisan, convergence in U.S. Policymakers that India is a very important strategic partner, and sooner or later, there's tariff issue will be resolved, and I think it should be the situation same as before.
I, I want to just ask a corollary. I know I said the previous one was the last one, but this maintenance that India-Pakistan relations are a bilateral matter. Uh, so why did India then send a delegation to 35 countries and internationalize the issue? That doesn't that go counter to that this is a bilateral matter, but we are going to these 35 or 36 countries and then discussing India-Pakistan relations and what Pakistan is doing, and soliciting, I guess, some kind of agreement and trying to convince other countries about India's position. How do these two things? Do you see them as contradictory or not?
No, not necessarily. You see, these delegations were almost every delegation in this was a parliamentary delegation.
Yes.
So basically, it's a parliamentary thing. So we do have these mechanisms also of parliamentary exchanges, parliamentary friendship groups. So they have gone and met. For example, in Saudi Arabia, they met the chief of Shura Council, the head of the Saudi India Parliamentary Friendship Group. So basically, how do the parliamentarians see this? Because at the end of the day, everybody is disturbed about the sudden escalation of cross-border violence. And see, no country in the world is patient now for any kind of terrorist activities. Now, so to that extent, India has to convey its position, and the position was why we were compelled to target those terrorist bases in Pakistan. So it is not an provocative act of war or something. It was a dedicated, fixed attack on those who we suspected were responsible for those blasts in Kashmir. So I think to that extent, to explain that position, this is what it is. It is not contradictory that we are asking other countries in none of these meetings, none of these delegations have told their interlocutors that we need your help in resolving this. No, I think we always believe in a bilateral resolution under the Simla Agreement, and I'm sure that, see, there are simple things. Indian government believes that there is no sincerity on the part of Pakistan to control these elements which are operating there. Okay, today they ban one organization, tomorrow they come up under some other name, right? Another thing. And you had seen, even you talked about Operation Sindoor. Some of those who were killed, the relatives or those sympathizers of terrorism, in their funeral prayers, there were all these senior army people joining there. So which means that there is a kind of a close networking
Relationship. Yeah.
within them. So that puts the whole thing in a different perspective. Some of those, bringing it back to our Gaza context and all, some of those resolutions which India opposed in UN was primarily because this reason that those resolutions did not specifically condemn the act, October 7 act on the part of Hamas, which cannot be said it's not in the nature of a terrorist attack. So, so this is a different discussion altogether. How world views terrorism these days, what kind of cooperation is going on, and India, for all that matters, is a country which takes terrorism very seriously. It has got very good cooperation, from all the Gulf countries, from Western countries, and this cooperation is actually strengthening day by day. So I would again clarify that this Operation Sindoor, or India-Pakistan, armed conflict, for that particular thing, not necessarily armed conflict. India's, military engagement against the terrorists does not necessarily, have any effect with India's relationship with other countries.
Ambassador Saab, thank you very much for coming to Khanversations. It was wonderful listening to you and learning from your experience and your knowledge of this diplomatic issues. And I hope you continue to come on the show, and I will be troubling you from regularly. We live in very interesting times, and I must say, if anything, Donald Trump has made it more interesting, to put it very mildly. So I will be happy to come back to you again and again. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, bhai. Thank you. Enjoy. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
So I will upload it.